02:47 hours. April 23, 1945. Kakazu Ridge, Okinawa. Staff Sergeant Robert Chen can't see his own hand in front of his face. He raises it anyway, fingers spread, and the darkness swallows it at 6 inches. No moon, no stars, just thick Pacific night over a chewed-up hillside. But when he presses his cheek to the stock of his rifle, the world explodes into sickly, glowing light. The Springfield M1903A4 under his hands is familiar. Walnut stock, cold steel, the same worn trigger he's known since Bougainville. The thing bolted on top of it is not. The scope above the action is a bulky, uneven cylinder, almost 3 pounds of steel, glass, and high-voltage secrets. It sits higher and heavier than his old uneartel. Cables run from its side to a junction box, then on to a thick, tarred cable that disappears into the dark behind him. The rifle feels nose-heavy, wrong. The picture in the eyepiece feels like witchcraft. Through the M2 infrared Sniperscope, the world is a ghost version of itself. Not black, not white. A smeared palette of pale greens and whites. Warm things glow, cold things sink into gray. Ahead of him, Kakazu Ridge slopes away in broken terraces of dirt and rock. Invisible light, it's just a jagged black mass. In the scope, it's an X-ray of heat. There, 200 yards out, just northeast, a pale, man-shaped blotch shifts inside a darker circle of earth. A spider hole, Japanese machine gunner. Chen watches the man roll his shoulders, stretch, then crouch again. His body heat paints a clear silhouette against the cooler soil. The difference between man and ground is maybe 8 degrees Fahrenheit. The scope turns it into day and night. Behind Chen, Corporal James Nakamura shifts his weight, careful not to rattle the big metal box on his back. The TM-11 power unit weighs 24 pounds, and it hums like a distant beehive. A tangle of cables runs from its T's. Terminals up to the scope's converter tube. Inside, a photocathode is being fed over 1,000 volts of carefully managed electricity. Nakamura glances at the dim, red-lit meter on the box. 4 hours, maybe a little more if we're lucky, he whispers. Then she goes dark. Chen just grunts. They don't need all night. They just need long enough. Down in the draws and gullies ahead, 400-plus Japanese infantry are dug in. Intelligence says at least 2 companies, maybe more. Deep caves, spider holes, interlocking machine guns, the kind of ridge that's chewed up Marines and soldiers alike for weeks already. And more than that, night is supposed to be theirs. For 3 years across the Pacific, Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Bougainville, New Georgia, the same pattern has played out. Day belongs to American artillery, aircraft, and tanks. Night belongs to the Japanese. They move in darkness like they own it. Infiltration, crawling, sudden close-range attacks. No flashlights, no talking. Terrain memorized by daylight, then walked in the dark by feel. Between late 1941 and early 1945, American records show over 14,000 men hit in night actions. Wire cut, foxholes overrun, machine gun pits silenced by men with grenades and bayonets who seem to step up out of the ground itself. The Pacific night is theirs. By reputation, by blood. Tonight, on this piece of Okinawa coral and earth, that's supposed to be different. Because for the first time, one American sniper team can see what the Japanese can't. Chen shifts the Springfield slightly, making the crosshair settle on the glowing man in the hole. The offset of the big scope is strange. He'd spent an entire afternoon on a rear area range, learning exactly how high and how left the reticle really was at different distances. At around 180 yards, dead on is dead on enough. Machine gun, northeast, 183, he murmurs. See him? Nakamura can't, not with his eyes, but he trusts what Chen says. I see the hole from the map, the spotter whispers. If you take him, his crew has to stick their heads up to see why he stopped. Exactly, Chen breathes. He exhales slow, the way he's done 1,000 times in daylight with a regular scope. The rifle is heavier, the balance off, but fundamentals, are fundamentals. Through the green world, the machine gunner stands. His heat signature stretches, legs unfolding. He turns slightly in his pit, perhaps to relieve a cramp or shift to a fresh ammo drum. Chen's fingertip takes up slack. The trigger breaks. The Springfield's report is a flat, heavy crack in the night. In visible light, there'd be a sharp orange muzzle flash, a puff of dust. Naked eyes on both sides of the line would see it. Through the scope, the bullet's path is invisible. The effect isn't. The pale shape in the spider hole jerks, flails once, then collapses in on itself. Heat spills in a spreading blotch into the surrounding dirt. Hit, Nakamura says softly. Chen lifts his head a fraction, eyes off the glowing eyepiece, and peers uselessly into the natural dark. He can't see anything but the vague lump of the ridge. He lowers his face again. In the glass, the world is still pulsing, alive with ghost heat. That's the first shot of the night. It won't be the last. Out there, in trenches and caves, Japanese soldiers blink into the blackness, seeing nothing but the same empty dark they've trained their whole lives to own. Somewhere among them, a man slumps dead in his hole, cut down by a bullet from a sniper they never saw. Later, far later, those who survive will try to explain it to interrogators and to one another. The Americans had a ghost, one will say, a sniper who could see us in the dark, a ghost gun, a Yurei. They'll give it a name, Ghost Sniper. For now, they just know that one of their own has died without warning, in supposed safety, in the one element that has always been theirs. And Staff Sergeant Robert Chen, cheek pressed to his strange, heavy scope, settles his breathing and goes looking, in that green-white world, for the next man who thinks night is on his side. Cut to black. Robert Chen had grown up with light. Not the clean open light of farm skies, but the dirty electric glow of San Francisco's Chinatown in the 1920s and 30s. His parents ran a small repair shop on the edge of the neighborhood, radios, lamps, sometimes a knockoff fan that had seen better days. Anything that hummed or buzzed when you plugged it in, his father could fix. By the time he was 12, Robert could strip and rewind a transformer coil, change out a broken tube, and tell by smell when insulation was burning instead of just dust. Light to him wasn't just something that happened when you flipped a switch. It was something made, one electron push at a time, through copper and glass. At the same time, he learned a different craft on weekends. An uncle, a wiry man who'd come down from the Sierra foothills, taught him to shoot an old Springfield on a makeshift range outside the city. "You can't always trust what you hear," the uncle would say, handing him a clip of 30-06, "but you can trust what you see through glass." The first time Chen lay prone, stock to shoulder, eye to scope, the world narrowed to a single, sharp circle. The target at 200 yards floated in that circle, clear and close. He squeezed the trigger. The rifle shoved back. The metal gong downrange chimed. He was hooked. Optics and electricity, glass and current. Two disciplines that seemed unrelated until the war took them and shook them together. When the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, he was in the back of the shop, swapping out a 6L6 vacuum tube in a lieutenant's radio. The broadcast cut mid-song, replaced by Roosevelt's measured anger. Within months, Chen found himself in uniform. The Army, unsure what to do with a Chinese-American who knew both circuits and rifles, tried to split the difference. Basic hadn't been any easier on him than on the next man. He humped pack and rifle, learned to crawl under wire while machine guns fired overhead. But after qualification, high scores with the M1903 and Garand, his file went sideways instead of straight to a rifle platoon. Signal Corps saw radio repair. Infantry saw excellent shot. Ordnance saw familiar with optics. In the end, a captain with too many jobs to fill ticked 3 boxes. By 1943, Chen was attached to a division in the Pacific as a kind of specialist, part sniper, part field armorer, part ad hoc radar and radio fixer when static set in. He fought with a plain 1903A4 at first, glassed with the standard Weaver and later a Unertl. On New Georgia, he worked the ridge lines, picking off machine gunners and officers when the jungle allowed. He learned fast what the Japanese were like at night. On Guadalcanal, before he even got there, stories filtered back. 17 separate night assaults in October 42 alone. Men shouting "Banzai" in the black, crash of bayonets in foxholes, entire lines tested under cover of darkness. On Bougainville and New Britain, he saw his own versions. Cautious daylight contacts turned into sudden, violent pushes after dusk. Men who'd memorized every route and rock by sunlight now crawling through it, silent, knives in their teeth. The Springfield, with its regular scope, was a good killing tool at dawn and dusk. At midnight, it was blind. He could hear movement. Sometimes he could see muzzle flashes. But beyond 50 yards, without a flare, without a moon, the scope was just a black tube. He tried all the usual tricks, tripwires and flares, predicted fire, staying awake long past sanity at the sound of every rustle. None of it changed the basic geometry. When the sun went down, the Japanese owned more of the map than Americans did. On paper, U.S. doctrine treated the night as something to be managed with flares and searchlights, maybe a few roving patrols. On the ground, it was something that reached into foxholes with bayonets. By early 1945, as the Okinawa campaign loomed, someone high up decided that was no longer acceptable. The Signal Corps had been playing with something new stateside, active infrared devices that used invisible beams to turn darkness into something you could see. Sniperscopes, they called them, M1 and M2 models, early, crude cousins of what future generations would know as night vision. Most were earmarked for M1 and M2 carbines. There was one problem. At the ranges on Okinawa, against entrenched positions in caves, the carbine's softball round wasn't always enough. Someone in ordnance remembered a file, a name. Chen, Robert, good with rifles, knows optics, electrical background. Orders shuffled. Lists got scribbled on. 2 weeks before he climbed into the rocks below Kakazu Ridge, Staff Sergeant Robert Chen found himself in a tent on a rear corner of Okinawa, staring down at a heavy, odd-looking scope sitting on a crate. "This is your new eyesight, Sergeant," a Signal Corps lieutenant had said, tapping the nasal of the thing. "M2 Sniperscope. We usually strap it to carbines. Command wants to know what happens if we give it to one of the best shots on the island instead." Chen had picked it up, grunting at the weight. "Looks like a radio mated with a drain pipe," he'd said. "More or less," the lieutenant replied. "But if it works, you'll see what the Japanese taught us to fear, before they see you." Chen had grinned, sharp and tired. "Then maybe," he'd said, "we can finally make the night ours for once." Before there was a ghost sniper, there was just a long list of failures in the dark. Okinawa had looked, on a wall map, like another island to be stepped on, crossed, and left behind. In reality, it was a labyrinth. Coral ridges, terraced fields, honeycombed hills, caves dug deep and linked like ant nests, villages turned into concrete reinforced bunkers. Daylight fighting was bad enough. Tanks brewed up on narrow roads. Infantry chewed to pieces crossing open paddies under cannon and mortar fire. At night, everything got worse. On the approaches to Kakazu, the 27th Infantry Division learned that the hard way. Patrols sent forward at dusk didn't come back. Listening posts got overrun. Men on machine gun posts woke to the feel of steel on their throats. The Japanese had been practicing this kind of warfare since the Russo-Japanese War in 1904. Their doctrine treated night not as a hazard but as a weapon. They'd study terrain all day, walk it over and over. Then, after dark, they'd flow along paths traced in their muscle memory. No lights, no sound. They'd hit in small groups. One would throw grenades. Another would finish with bayonets. They went around machine guns, not at them. American responses were clumsy. At first, flares. Trip flares on concertina wire. Signal flares fired unsuspected movement, star shells from artillery popping overhead, washing the world in harsh white for 30 seconds at a time. It helped. It also made everyone a target. Each burst of light told the Japanese exactly where the Americans were looking. They learned to freeze when the flare went up, then move when it died, while the defenders' night vision was still shot. Chen watched one of those flares backfire in the worst way. His company was strung along a reverse slope, covering a gully the enemy had probed twice already. The night was muggy, full of the smell of wet earth and cordite, so... Midway down the gully, something moved. A nervous second lieutenant popped a flare. The harsh white glare showed 3 men hugging the far bank. It also silhouetted the entire American position on the near side. Every cave and gun position on the ridge opposite saw the line in perfect relief. Within seconds, mortar rounds bracketed them. Shells walked up and down the shallow line, shredding sandbags and men alike. The infiltrators in the gully didn't have to do anything. The flare had done their work for them. Later, picking himself out of a half-caved-in scrape, ears ringing, Chen muttered, "We're lighting ourselves up for them. Night hates us." He tried using his regular glass in the gloom anyway. He'd lie prone at last light, scope trained on a likely forward route, hoping to catch a muzzle flash or a silhouette against the sky. By 20 minutes after sunset, it was useless. The unearthal showed him nothing but a darker circle inside the dark. He tried what other snipers did, sound mapping, listening for the direction of a shot, counting seconds between crack and thud. Against Japanese who knew how to mask their fire and move after 1 or 2 rounds, it was a losing game. One night, a listening post just 30 yards down from his makeshift OP went silent. He and Nakamura found them at dawn, 2 men, throats cut, rifles still in their laps. The wire around their foxhole had been lifted and set aside carefully, then replaced. "They walked right up to them," Nakamura said, voice low. "They never saw them." Chen stared at the faces. They could have been sleeping. "Dark favors whoever knows it better," he said. On Guadalcanal, the Marines had a saying, "At night they come." On Bougainville, "The jungle moves after midnight." On Okinawa, among the rocks above Kakazu, the phrase spread in hoarse whispers, "Don't move after dusk. They own it." Higher up, someone finally took those whispers seriously enough to experiment. Signal Corps and Ordnance, already tinkering with infrared in laboratories and stateside bases, got orders. Find a way to let a few men on the line see without lighting themselves up. The M1 and M2 Sniperscopes, early infrared aiming devices, were already being fitted to carbines in limited numbers, mostly for perimeter defense against infiltrators. A few spare units, plus an experimental tube assembly meant for a longer range application, made their way into crates bound for Okinawa. They weren't meant for Springfields, they weren't meant for snipers in the traditional sense. But the night didn't count, about meant for, and neither by this point did men like Chen. When a crate with odd serial numbers and Signal Corps stamps ended up at a divisional ordnance tent, and somebody opened it to reveal scopes, converter tubes, and TM-11 battery boxes, the reaction was mixed. Some saw fragile lab toys. Chen saw a chance. He'd been a good sniper in daylight. He wanted to be the first one to see what a sniper could be in the dark. The first time Chen picked up the M2 Sniperscope, he nearly dropped it. "Hell of a lot heavier than glass," he grunted. The Signal Corps lieutenant who'd shepherded the gear this far smirked. "Welcome to the future, Sergeant," he said. "It's not pretty yet, but it works." Spread across a crate were the parts. A big clumsy infrared scope with a thick objective lens, housing, and a rubber eye cup. A separate infrared illuminator, essentially a filter and reflector assembly meant to beam invisible light downrange. Thick cables with rubberized insulation. The TM-11 power supply, a metal box the size of a small suitcase with dials and a meter, designed to feed over 1,000 volts to the scope's image tube. In normal M2 configuration, all of this bolted to an M1 or M2 carbine, The carbine's short length and light weight helped offset the extra gear. The shooter would carry the battery in a backpack. The scope would show a bright, ghostly image of whatever the IR lamp illuminated out to about 100 yards. "It's calibrated for carbine ballistics at closer ranges," the lieutenant said, handing Chen a mimeographed sheet. "You try to slap this on a 30-06, and the reticle won't match your drop past a certain point." "So we learn the holds," Chen said simply. The lieutenant eyed him. "You think you can make this monster sit on a 003?" he asked. Chen looked at the Springfield leaning against the tent pole. He thought about the extra recoil of a 30-06 and the delicacy of the scope's converter tube. "With the right mount, maybe," he said, "if we don't mind making the balance worse and the armorer hate us." The armorer in question, Sergeant Red McCloskey, already hated a lot of things. He sucked air through his teeth when Chen brought the idea to him. "You want me to drill and tap a perfectly good sniper 03, McCloskey said, "so you can bolt this overgrown flashlight on top of it." "You hate the Japanese night raids as much as I do," Chen replied. "Consider this. Preventative maintenance." They compromised. Instead of permanent regulation-violating holes in the receiver, McCloskey and Chen machined a clamping saddle mount that bit onto existing bases and the rear sight collar. It was ugly and tall. The scope sat higher than any sane glass would. To get a consistent cheek weld, Chen had to tape padding to the stock and adjust his face position. The zero process was tedious. By day, they took the contraption to a coral quarry behind the lines. By night, they came back with the TM-11 battery, its cables, and a small generator humming to keep it topped up while they fiddled. They set up IR reflective targets, a man-sized board with a tin plate tacked to its center, at measured distances, 50, 100, 150, 200 yards. McCloskey cursed as he tightened and loosened screws on the mount between each string, trying to get the scope's reticle to line up with where the 30-06 actually sent rounds. The scope itself didn't magnify much. It was closer to a 1-to-2 power optic, but in full darkness, with the illuminator pumping invisible light downrange, it turned pitch black into a ghostly, usable image. Chen learned its quirks. The field of view was narrow. Any movement made the world smear. Bright, close objects, like a man's hand in front of the lens, washed everything out. The recoil jostled the wiring if he wasn't careful how he wrapped it. The battery pack was a beast, 20-plus pounds on Nakamura's shoulders, cables running up under his arm to the scope. "Feels like I'm humping a car battery and a radio at the same time," Nakamura grumbled during one nighttime familiarization. "At least I'm not making you shoot with this thing," Chen said. "You just have to make sure I don't yank the cord out when I move." They burned through hours of training time. At first, the lieutenant in charge of the experiment hovered, stopwatch in hand. Then, as reports from other parts of the island about night infiltrations continued to stack up, he left them alone. "Just don't blow the damn tube," he warned. "We don't have spares. And try not to electrocute yourselves. That's a lot of juice in that box." Chen nodded. He'd worked with dangerous voltages before. He respected them. He also respected the thing he saw in the scope when they finally got it dialed. At 200 yards, in a night so dark Nakamura couldn't see his own boots, Chen could pick out a man's head and shoulders as a pale shape against cooler rock. He could see some. Shift their weight, bring a rifle up, reach for a grenade. The Springfield, even with the scope and its awkward mount, would put a 150-grain bullet into that shape's center in under a second and a half from the moment he saw it, if he was ready. They did a live-fire run with volunteers. A squad of infantry played infiltrators, moving up a draw in total darkness, told to do their best to take out a series of listening posts. Chen lay on his belly above them with the ghost scope. He called out positions in a low voice as he saw them. Single man, left of the log, 2 crawling together near the tree, 1 standing to signal. The defenders on the line, warned ahead, pivoted to face those threats. "It's like he's cheating," one of them said afterwards. Cheating or not, command took notice. Within days, Chen and Nakamura were told to pack up their odd, humming rig and move toward Kakazu. They would be attached temporarily to a battalion on the line there. not as regular riflemen. As something the battalion commander, with a queer mix of hope and skepticism, called our pet ghost. Sergeant Major Ishida Haruto had lived his whole adult life in the night. He'd led patrols in Manchuria under a winter moon, moving ski-quiet among Russian outposts. He'd crawled through cane fields under southern stars on Guadalcanal, tasting red dirt and listening for the soft American snore. Now, at 41 on Okinawa, he was in the last of too many campaigns. His company was down to half strength. Caves that had once held entire platoons now housed tired handfuls of men. Ammunition was rationed. Food, too. One thing remained abundant: darkness. It pooled in the ravines, clung to the pockmarked hills, seeped into every cave entrance. The Americans had more guns, more tanks, more airplanes. But at night, in the winding draws and stone gullies under Kakazu Ridge, Ishida still believed he could be the hunter. On the night of April 23rd, he led a picket-strength probing force, 40 men, no more, out of the rear mouths of the caves under his control. Their orders were not to charge, not yet. They were to slip forward, find out where the latest American line lay, cut a few throats if they could, and then return with a map drawn in memory. They moved in file, then in spreading fans, each man with routes memorized. No talking, no smoking, boots wrapped in cloth to muffle stones. They heard American voices on the wind, distant, low, the clink of gear, once the harsh sound of a cough stifled too late. They did not see muzzle flashes. That, to Ishida, meant they were doing it right. Then one of his men died. It was quiet. No warning crack, no blind spray of a jittery American's automatic fire. Just a soft grunt, a body folding, a dull thud as a helmet struck earth. Ishida froze, one hand coming up reflexively to signal a halt. "Tanaka?" he whispered. No answer. He inched closer, feeling his way along the ground, and reached out. His hand found the man's boot. Then his leg. Then the limp curve of his hip. His fingers came away wet. He touched the wound by feel, a pulped hollow in the middle of Tanaka's chest, still warm, leaking life. Single shot, clean. From where? He listened. No echoing report, no telltale ring of an American bullet going supersonic overhead. Just the distant, irregular thump of artillery somewhere else on the island and the soft hiss of wind through grass. He'd barely had time to process that when another man dropped. This one's rifle clattered as it fell. The sound seemed to crack the night. "Down!" Ishida hissed. His men obeyed without question, flattening into the ground. He strained his ears. Still nothing. No flare overhead, no shouted orders in English, no visible muzzle flashes. Just men dying. It happened again 10 minutes later. A pair of riflemen, slipping along a low berm, both jerked and fell within a heartbeat of each other. The entry wounds weren't close enough together to be machine gun work. There was no spray. It felt like an execution. Invisible. Precise. Back in the cave complex, after they wriggled back in ones and twos, breath high and curses low, the survivors tried to describe it. "They see us," one said, voice tight. "They see us before we see them." "How?" another demanded. There were no flares, no fires, just darkness. "Ghosts," a third muttered bitterly. "The Americans have ghosts now." When their battalion commander, a gaunt major with eyes sunk in his skull, questioned Ishida directly, the sergeant major chose his words carefully. "They are shooting men in the dark as if it was day," he said. "One shot, one man, from far away. We never saw where." "Machine gun?" the major asked. "Single rifle," Ishida replied. "No chatter, no spray, just pluck, pluck, men falling." "You were careless," the major snapped automatically. Ishida swallowed his pride. "We were cautious," he said. "As cautious as any patrol I have ever led. This was something else." Later, when he spoke more freely to a junior officer, he let the superstition in the back of his mind out. "We used to have an advantage at night," he said. "We moved, they did not. We saw, They did not. Now it feels as if they have stolen that sight from us. He used a word he hadn't used since childhood, since his grandmother's stories of wandering spirits. Yurei, ghost. It didn't take long for the rank and file to twist it into a new label. Yurei no Sweepa, they called it, the ghost sniper. At first it was said half-jokingly, in that bitter soldier's humor that crops up even in the worst places. Then, as more men failed to come back from nighttime recon, as stories of single unseen show spread, the joke curdled into fear. The idea that the Americans had found a way to look into their element, to pierce the blackness that had always been their cloak, gnawed at the edge of every night movement. And on the ridge above, lying prone on his belly, cheek against foreign glass, Staff Sergeant Chen kept hunting for that fear. Every time a heat-bright figure lifted a head a little too high in a fold of ground, every time a crewman in a rock-roofed MG nest repositioned on what he thought was a safe line after dark, Chen saw it. And he was there, in the green world, to answer. The word came down at dusk. Expect infiltration tonight. Hold this line or we bleed for it tomorrow. Kakazu Ridge, already cratered by days of shelling, took on a different face in the failing light. Shadows deepened. Familiar gullies vanished into one another. Distances compressed. By the time full dark hit, a man could step 10 yards from his foxhole and vanish. Chen and Nakamura set up just behind the forward platoon line on a slight rise with a view into 2 key draws. The battery took both of them to position. Nakamura settled into a shallow scrape, easing the TM-11 off his shoulders. He connected the heavy cable to the scope's box, checked the voltage meter's quivering needle, and flipped the final switch. The scope hummed faintly. In the eyepiece, the static of the converter tube firmed into a coherent image. "Power good," Nakamura whispered. "Call it 4 hours before it slides." Chen eased the Springfield into position on a sandbag rest. The M2's illuminator sat slung under the barrel, side-mounted on the clamping system. It cast no visible beam. Somewhere in the near-infrared spectrum, though, a cone of invisible light speared out into the night, bouncing off rocks, earth, and flesh. In the glass, the hillside bloomed. He did a slow sweep. On the right, a shattered tree trunk was a gray stump. On the left, a bunker roof held the heat retrained from the day's sun, still warmer than the air. He tuned past both, hunting for motion. He didn't have to wait long. 100 yards out, a faint smear of heat detached from the ground. One man, then another, emerging from a shallow cut in the terrain, barely visible to the naked eye. In the scope, their body heat made them flicker like pale ghosts against the cooler earth. "Patrol, right draw," Chen murmured. 3, spacing, 10, maybe 15 feet. "Company sees wires thin there," Nakamura replied. "You want to take point, man?" "Not yet," Chen said. "Let's see what they do." The 3 figures moved slowly, testing each step. One knelt now and then, feeling for wire. They were good. They moved with the patience of men who'd done this many times before. At 60 yards, they halted. One man reached into his tunic. The heat signature of his hand flashed bright as he pulled something out. Grenade? Wire cutters? Chen didn't need to find out. He took up slack and fired. The reticle's crosshair, adjusted for the odd mounting and carbine-calibrated scope, sat a hair low and right, so he held a touch high and left. The bullet did what 30-06 does. It carried straight and fast. The lead man's heat signature jerked, folded, and vanished, merging with the cooler ground. The 2 behind him flinched. One dove flat. The other took a half-step back, then froze. No flare. No shouted "Sniper" in English. Nothing to tell them where death had come from. A moment later, they began to crawl backwards, using elbows and knees, fading toward their cut. "Let them go," Nakamura said. Chen did. Killing patrols was satisfying. Killing them all, and leaving no one to spread the story, was, strategically, incomplete. Let a few tell the tale of men dying in supposed safety. Let the myth of the ghost sniper grow. As the night wore on, the scale increased. Groups of 5 and 6 slipped out of ravines. Bigger blurs of heat clustered in depressions as staging points. Somewhere orders in Japanese were being whispered, probing here, pushing there. Chen worked methodically. He picked team leaders first, men whose posture, whose hand signals, marked them as the ones others followed. He hit machine gun crews when they shifted belts or rotated barrels, catching them in those brief moments when they rose above their pits. He paid attention to angles. The M2 scope, its illuminator, and his rifle weren't some magic wand. They had blind spots, folds in the ground where his beam didn't reach, areas occluded by rock. He and Nakamura had walked the map by day, memorizing every null, every fold. "Remember," Nakamura whispered more than once, "they'll use the same paths. They're not inventing new ground at night." Midway through the action, the battery needle dipped. "How we doing?" Chen asked quietly. Nakamura checked the gauge with a practiced glance. 3 hours left, he said. "Maybe less if you keep swinging her back and forth." He wasn't wrong. Every adjustment meant the converter tube had to restabilize, drawing that trickle of high voltage just a bit harder. Across the line, flares still went up now and then, not from their platoon. Others didn't have a ghost in their back pocket. Each flare washed parts of the ridge in harsh white. In the scope, those areas bloomed hot and useless. Chen would avert his eye or shutter the lens, waiting for the burnout glow to fade. He was in the middle of one of those blink-away moments when all hell broke loose 50 yards to their left. A squad-sized element of Japanese, maybe emboldened by knowing where the flares were, maybe just desperate, poured out of. A low saddle screaming. No crawling now, no subtlety. Bayonets, grenades, a straight-up banzai toward a section of trench. In the normal scheme of things, Chen wouldn't have had more than a chance or two to take shots before they closed. Tonight, he had seconds, and seconds mattered. He snapped the scope toward the attack, even as his naked eyes took in nothing but a vague lump of movement in blackness. In the green image, it was carnage waiting to happen. He saw 8, 9, 10 heat signatures, brighter and tighter together than anything else on the hillside. He put the crosshair a fraction ahead of the lead man's chest and fired. The man pitched forward, his heat spattering into the ground. He shifted, hit the next, then the next. The Springfield slammed into his shoulder again and again, the odd weight of the scope overhead barely noticed now. Down in the trench, the defenders saw only silhouettes in the dark, dropping faster than expected. "Somebody's working 'em!" someone yelled, and a bar joined in, mowing through the staggered line. Within seconds, that charge died under a pile of its own bodies. No one in that squad made it to the wire. Later, a survivor from a supporting element would tell an interrogator, "We ran at them in the dark, as we had done many times before. Men fell in front, neat and sudden. It felt as if someone was standing in front of us with a lantern, showing the Americans exactly where to aim. We never saw the light, only the deaths." Battery power trickled down. 2 hours. Then 1. Fatigue set in. Chen's eyes burned. The world inside the scope swam. At one point a cable snagged on a rock as he shifted, yanking the eyepiece sideways. The image collapsed to static. "Fix it," he hissed, panic briefly cracking his usual calm. Nakamura's hands were already on the junction, fingers finding the loose connection, twisting it home. The image snapped back. He barely missed the chance to catch a lone figure slipping toward a gap in the wire. He hit that one low in the thigh. The heat signature flopped, then tried to crawl. A second shot, higher, stopped it. As the first gray hint of dawn bled into the eastern sky, the battery meter kissed the low red mark. "Half hour," Nakamura said. "If that." The last infiltrators of the night, those who hadn't already turned back or died, hugged whatever cover they could find, waiting for daylight to give them enough contrast to move or retreat. Chen could see some of them as faint blobs in shallow depressions. He didn't shoot. They weren't threats now, not in the same way. When light came, rifles all along the line would have a say. Instead he aimed higher, at a rock outcrop above a known cave entrance. A single brighter heat shape lurked there, a lookout who'd been calling corrections all night. One last shot, one last ghost's touch. He squeezed. The shape crumpled and sloughed off the rock. Then the image in the scope flickered, dimmed, and finally faded to a uniform gray-green wash. The battery was done. Nakamura flipped switches, unplugged cables, started coiling them with the automatic care of a man who'd had to field. Strip radios, under fire. Chen rolled onto his back on the cold ground, the Springfield across his chest, the dead scope staring up at a sky slowly bleeding back into blue. "You good?" Nakamura asked. "My eyes hate me," Chen said. "But yeah." Down the line, men were standing up out of their holes, stretching, lighting cigarettes with shaking hands. They all looked more intact than they would have if the night had gone like so many others. "Whatever that was," one rifleman said, nodding toward Chen's odd setup, "I'll take more of it." On the other side of the hill, in caves that now stank of cordite and fear, Japanese officers were drawing new maps in the dirt. "Here," one said, tapping a sector where their infiltrators had died in disproportionate numbers. "Somewhere here is the ghost. We will have to deal with him. Perhaps we simply avoid that place at night." When your enemy starts redrawing his plans around one rifleman's invisible arcs, you know you're doing something right. The Battle of Okinawa rolled on. Kakazu Ridge would be fought over, taken, lost, and taken again in the maelstrom of artillery and infantry that defined that campaign. The casualty lists swelled, names blurred. In the thick of that chaos, a single experimental infrared-equipped Springfield wasn't going to get a line in any major history. The M2 Sniperscope program itself stayed small. Most units that got them used them on carbines, as intended, for perimeter defense. A few reports filtered back from Okinawa about one long rifle fitted with the gear being employed with good effect by a sniper team. Those reports used clipped phrases. Subject engaged enemy out to approx. 200 yards in conditions of no visible light. Enemy night infiltration attempts reduced in sector. Japanese prisoners referred to sniper who can see in dark. No one called it ghost sniper in the official paperwork. But among the men who had been on that line, the nickname stuck. Companies rotated. Men got wounded, evacuated, replaced. Stories passed down. "There's a Chinese-American staff sergeant and a Nisei spotter up on that hill," someone would say. "They've got a rig that lets them see heat. They'll kill you if you sneeze at night." By the time the division moved off Okinawa, the TM-11s and the delicate tubes went back into crates. Some were shipped home for study. Others stayed in theater for perimeter work. Chen went home too. He had scars, a promotion, and a head full of images that didn't match anything civilian life offered. He went back to fixing things. Radios, early televisions. Later, in the 60s, he found work with a company contracted to help the Army proofread technical manuals for new starlight scopes and low-light devices heading to Vietnam. The first time he looked through one of those second-generation devices at a test range in the States, a grainy green image of a deer at the tree line, he almost laughed. "This is polite," he said. The captain showing him the gear frowned. "Sir?" "The one I had on Okinawa was like strapping a car battery to your back and trying to shoot with a periscope," Chen explained. "This is civilized." He read the manuals and saw no mention of what he and a tired armorer had cobbled together in a tent under shellfire. He didn't expect to. War is big. It eats small experiments by the thousands. But in the footnotes of those manuals, in the assumptions they made about what a night-capable marksman could and should do, ranges, roles, limitations, he saw the ghost of his old rig. The idea had gotten out of the bottle, that you could make a single, thinking shooter deadly in the dark without lighting up the world for everyone else. On the far side of the old front line, a few Japanese veterans told their own versions of the story. In coffee houses and at regimental gatherings, men with gray hair and faded uniforms spoke of Okinawa, of caves, and of a night when the Americans reached into the darkness in a new way. "They had a sniper who saw us without flares," one would say. "He killed men in the open and men in holes. We called him the Ghost Sniper. We thought perhaps the Americans had made a deal with the spirits of the island." They'd chuckle at their own superstition, then fall quiet. the memory of men dropping in unseen arcs still unsettled. In a veterans' hall stateside, decades later, an old man with a careful gait and steady hands might be found at a table under photos of young faces. On the wall above the bar, an M1903A4 hangs, clean, polished, with a standard scope fitted. No cables, no heavy box, no alien cylinder. Someone once asked him, "Is that what you carried?" "Close enough," he said. "Did you really have night vision?" the younger man pressed. "Back then?" Chen thought about the humming TM-11, the hot weight on Nakamura's back, the harsh, flickering green image of men who thought they were invisible. "We had something," he said. "Crude, heavy, dangerous if you set it up wrong. But for a few nights on one ugly ridge, it let us look back at the dark the way it had been looking at us for years." He took a sip of his drink. "Technology gets better," he added. "The wiring gets neater. The tubes get smaller. But the reason stays the same." "What reason?" the younger man asked. "Because some poor bastard in a hole somewhere is tired of getting killed by an enemy he can't see," Chen said. "And he decides he won't let that happen again if he can help it. Ghosts come and go." The ghost sniper was just one man with one jury-rigged piece of kit on one corner of one campaign. But he stood at the beginning of a line that runs through every night vision clip you see now, green video of soldiers ghosting through cities, scopes lighting up heat in distant hills. The Japanese who survived Okinawa remembered him as a phantom. The army remembered him as a successful test. Chen remembered him as just himself, doing a job with a tool that didn't exist in any manual until someone made it for real. On Kakazu Ridge, in those hours between midnight and dawn, when the night was supposed to belong to the Pacific enemy, a strange, heavy scope on an old Springfield had made a different claim. For once, the ghosts in the dark were on his side.